it's kind of an honor to be, I think I'm the only non-Sauce Labs presenter during this session today. So I'm honored by that. First thing is we want to admit that software test automation is difficult. It's not an easy thing. If somebody tells you otherwise, don't believe it. It is very difficult. And in fact, UI automation, UI software test automation is probably the most difficult thing to do. For me, UI automation, testing automation is very much like robotics programming. You are literally writing a program to manage another object, like another environment, and you must be prepared to handle a variety of things that are maybe unexpected. You know, if you're driving a robot, what happens when you run into a rock? What happens when you run into soft sand? How do you manage a robotic arm? Well, software UI test automation is very similar to that. You've got to be able to handle the UI going into a variety of states. What happens if the UI becomes unresponsive? The UI throws up something that you're not expected. Web UI automation is about as tough as you can get. I've been doing this for close to 15 years now, and I love it myself. I find it very rewarding when it's done right, very challenging. I love solving problems. I love being in the diagnostic mode. So for me, this is exactly where I want to be. So in my presentation, I'm going to be focusing more on the designing of your software test. How do you put together good software tests? And those need to start with good test cases. Now, to me, writing a good test case is very similar to putting together a navigation plan. You know, you want to take a road trip. Well, you need to start off with a plan. How do you get from point A to point B? Now, your plan might be getting from point A, the north end of the city, to the south end of the city, or it might be a much bigger plan. You need to go from Los Angeles to New York. Well, the 10,000 level foot plan might be jump in your car, drive a couple thousand miles, and you arrive. Versus the low level detail plan is going to be, I got my keys in my pocket. I need to pull out my keys. I need to insert my key into my door. I need to unlock my door. I need to pull the handle. I need to open the door. I need to get in my seat. I need to buckle my seat belt. I need to put my key into the ignition. I need to turn the ignition, start the car. I need to let go of the key when the car is running. Well, that's getting into the weeds. You're spending too much time on how to do the test. A navigation plan or a good test case is, you know, basically you're talking about the waypoints. You're going from point A to point B to point C, just like navigating the streets or navigating the highways. You know, a navigation plan is, okay, here's your starting point, go down the street, turn left. When you hit this street, turn right, take this ramp to get on the freeway, take this exit to get off the freeway, stop here for gas. Those are the kinds of details that should be in a road trip plan. Similarly, when we talk about a good test case, that's the level of the details we want in a test case. Is, you know, you're going from major point to major point within your software application, whatever that application is. One of the things I want to start off with now is, what are some of the problems with typical test coding style? Well, in a typical, what we can call procedural type of test coding, you've got little to no coding consistency. So you've got a team of testers, and they're writing their test cases. They're writing their tests based upon the test cases they are handed. Well, one person will write their test one way, another person will write it in a different way, and there's very little consistency between one tester to another. They can also be difficult to read and understand because the tester wrote it, that person understands it, but the next person, he can't understand it. I've seen this a lot. If it's not properly structured, the test itself, the test code can be very difficult to maintain. And of course, if it's difficult to maintain, you run into very high maintenance costs. So a couple of examples now is, okay, here's a common small test case. This is what I call the 10,000 foot level test case. You've got one line of code, okay? And basically it's kind of like telling you what is, here's the destination, here's where I want to get to. But you've got no idea how to get there. You really can't tell what in detail did it validate. So sure, it's verifying credit card options, okay? That's written in plain English. But how did you verify the credit card options? How did you get to the credit cards? How did you navigate the web app in order to be able to verify credit cards? All of this detail is missing in here. And then we can go to the other extreme. This is the test case where I'm talking about, okay, you're stuck in the details. I'm taking out my key out of my pocket. I'm inserting my key into the door. I'm starting the car. I'm buckling my seatbelt. I'm backing out of my driveway, etc. This is a very large, complex test case that it's just too much detail. We need to come up with a compromise, something halfway in between where I can quickly and easily see what is, how do I go from point A to point B without spending too much time in the details, in the weeds. So that's where Fluent style coding comes into play. So what is Fluent style coding? And I've certainly got examples of this, show you demonstrations of this as they come up. So technically Fluent style coding, other people call it method chaining, is an object-oriented coding style. You are creating objects and you are wiring them up together in such a way one method does directly flow into another method. So you can actually do method.method.method.method, etc. That is Fluent style coding. And this works very well. It's very natural and easy to do in test cases, because test cases, you're navigating an application just like you're navigating a road. So you're going from point A to point B, and your test case, your test code should tell you, okay, here's how I'm navigating the application and going from A to B. Okay? Fluent style coding, in my research, it appears to have been first introduced by Martin Fowler in an essay called Fluent Interface. And in my slides, this is an actual link. You can click on this link to see his essay. And he described it. It is also used it's actually used today in Microsoft Link, just like this. This is an example of Fluent style coding where, okay, you start with some object and you've got .method, 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 and methods can take parameters as well, of course. That's the basic definition of Fluent style coding. It's got many advantages. The first advantage, which I personally absolutely love and makes coding tests so much faster and easier, you can take advantage of the IntelliSense that's built into your IDE. IntelliSense can lead you to what you can do next. Because you already have an object, that object has methods in it, and IntelliSense tells you what methods are available. So you can just pick that method and give it a parameter and then move on to the next method and the next method. Because IntelliSense leads you on what you can do, junior programmers can easily create tests. The IntelliSense is guiding them. It is also speeding up test creation. I love being able to type, 1 or 2 letters of a method. IntelliSense pops up and says, okay, the letters you type match this method. I hit a tab and it, for me, I use Visual Studio a lot, and Visual Studio just automatically fills in the rest of the text for me. So for me, it's a lot less typing even. Fluent style coding also makes your test code simpler and easier to read. You can actually understand it. For me, an excellent way to know if you've got a good test case or not is if I'm reading the code and within 30 seconds, I can fully understand what that test does. That's a good measurement of whether or not you have a good test case. And finally, tests are easier to maintain this way. So here's an actual example. This is a real test case that I put together. It's in-unit style. So I'm getting data. In this case, this could be a whole nother subject. I've got a little bit of black magic. It's pulling data from a MongoDB server, getting data for the test to use. And now I start off with an object. In my demo, I'll explain this little bit of magic. What is Dell.com? Where does that come from? How does that get set? I'll explain that during the demo. And that gives me an object to start with. That basically represents, this is my starting page, my home page. I've already launched the browser. I've already navigated to my starting page of my application. And so because I'm there and I have an object, okay, now I can navigate to something. So here, in Dell.com, we've got laptops, we've got desktops, we've got a number of things. So I can say navigate to my home laptops. We have home and we also got business laptops. And then I can do my verification. Okay, verify that the breadcrumb shown in the browser matches this value. So data.laptops.home laptop breadcrumb. I pulled that from MongoDB. That's my expected data, my expected string. So these methods, you can see here, it's pretty easy to read, pretty simple to understand, and really gets the job done very, very simply. All right, so now let's go ahead and show you for real what this looks like in practice. So we've got Visual Studio, and these are the test cases. So this is that sample I just showed you. We can expand on that. So here is a much larger sample. I start off with my same home object, and now I say, okay, navigate to my business laptops, then verify the breadcrumb, make sure I'm getting the correct breadcrumb there. Then I can say, verify header text as well. So we also have, in a content pane, we also have header text, so I can verify that my header text is correct. And now we've got buttons. We can say select the Vostro. And I can actually show you what does that application look like. So here, this is my application I am testing. So when I talk about select Vostro, that means I'm clicking on this tab to select Vostro versus select the Inspiron versus the XPS, the Precision, etc. So that's what I'm talking about in this application. So I'm selecting the Vostro tab and I'm verifying the content header. Now, what is this content header that I'm verifying? That is this content header. So here's our content pane. So I'm verifying that this content header, because as you notice, that content header changes from tab to tab. So my test is just verifying, hey, yeah, once I click a tab, I get to the correct content. The header has the correct content. I could do additional verifications in here. For this demo, I'm just verifying this header. We can certainly expand on that quite easily. And then I say, okay, I just keep going down the list. Select the Inspiron verification, select an SPX tab, select the Precision tab, the Chromebook tab. Now, here is where it gets a little bit tricky in this particular application. I want to select G-Series. Now, you don't see G-Series here. See, G-Series is off to the right. I can't click on it right now. I have to scroll to the right before I can see this G-Series laptop. Once I click on it, then I get my header. But if I try to click on G-Series with this scroll bar right here, I would actually get an error from Selenium saying, hey, that element that I want to click on is non-interactable. So I have to be smart and I have to take into account I need to scroll to the right before I can click on this G-Series tab. So that's why I've got, hey, here is scroll next. I've also coded a scroll previous if I want to use that. I select my G-Series, I do one more verification, and it's done. Now this is executable. So let's go ahead and do that. And, okay, not that one, browse tests, browse business laptop, and I can actually say run this. And it's compiling, and then it's going to begin execution here in just a moment. And I'm going to trust that the browser launches on this desktop. I've got two desktops here. Build succeeded. What is taking you so long? It should be launching the browser here just about any minute. Come on. There it goes. Finally, it initiated. Oh, there's my browser. Okay, launch the browser. We're going to navigate to the business laptops. And maybe because I had to drag and drop the browser over here, it's not working right. Let's take a look. No, it thinks it's still executing. So this is all automated. This was running just before our presentation started.
It's a live demo. It never works.
Yep, you're right. When there's a glitch, it's during your presentation, right?
First rule of presenting.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, the idea is that, yes, it would launch that browser, and just like before, it would go to the business laptop, and normally it would start here, and it would click on the laptops, verify this header, click on Vostro, verify this header, click on Inspiron, etc. That's what it was supposed to do. Timeout occurred, waiting for server. Oh, I said I need to pull my mistake, I forgot to launch my MongoDB server in order to get the data. So failed demo attempt only because my mistake, I forgot to start my MongoDB server. But moving on, rather than try to fix that, let's go back here.
Well, I think it's just an important revalidation of your earlier point that this is hard. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that need to be considered, and it's okay to make mistakes, but we want to make it as easy as possible to find out how we can correct those.
Yes, absolutely true. And in fact, that is one of the things that is important to note here. We do have a good stack trace, which tells me what was the root cause of my problem. Timeout trying to pull data from MongoDB server. Okay, and so that's important to take a look at. There are a few rules you do need to follow in putting together Fluent style test coding. I've already talked about this. We want to concentrate on modularity of creating your tests. I've found it best to actually divide your solution into 4 projects. You've got the core. This is basically all your utility methods, your base classes. I've got my end unit set up and tear down in the core. So my tests draw from a common core. Then I have models. These are nothing but a set of plain old C objects. These are my data models that my tests will use. And this is where the hard work is, the pages layer. This is where all of your page objects are going to be. So you have your element definitions, all of your methods, your action steps, your verification steps. The smarts, all the smarts go into this pages layer right here. And now your tests, you have nothing but your Fluent style tests in here, which is nothing more than chaining everything together. Now, in order for Fluent style to work, every test method must return a page object. You can't go chain from one page to the next page if you're not returning a page object. You cannot return void or a bool or any other value. But you can have, okay, one method returns a different page object. So maybe I'm on my browse page or I'm on my product page. And then I say, okay, add this product to the cart and select the cart, and I'm going to say go to cart. Well, I'm going, go to cart method. I'm going to go from my product page to my cart page. So your add to cart method is going to return a cart page project page object, instead of the browse product object. And we can see samples of that. If we look more at one thing I didn't do is show you the structure of these tests. So as I talked about here, I've got my core, and I've got my models, I've got my pages, and I've got my tests. So pages, personally, I like, okay, so that's my test object. Here is a page object. Every page is returning what I call this. Almost everything is returning this, which is the home laptops page. I can select latitude, okay? It clicks on the latitude tab, the Vostro tab, the Inspiron tab. So I've got all of these methods. They're all returning page objects so that you can chain them together and just go from one to the next. Here's my scroll previous, my scroll next. And what I've done is I personally prefer using partial classes, because what I do is I put in one class, these are my action methods. You know, I'm selecting an object, I'm typing text, I'm clicking buttons, I'm changing values. All of these are actions, things I'm doing on the web page. Versus this one, these would be nothing but verification. So I separate out all of my verification steps into a separate partial class. So that's how I like, this is just the way I'd prefer to my coding style. So partial class part 1, actions. Partial class part 2 is all of my verifications. Now, yes, I've got some commented code out here because I wasn't able to fully finish putting this together. What this is doing, and one of the problems you will run into is, I'm on page 1, I want to save data, and, you know, I want to capture some data, and I want to use it in page 2 or 3 or 4. For example, I'm in my product page, and I want to capture the price on the product page, and then I want to go to my cart, and I want to verify I'm getting the correct price displayed in my cart. So what I have done in my code, in my core, I've created this thing called a data cache. This is a global data cache. So I can actually, so for example, in my method, coming down here, and it is, yes, right here. Right here, I am capturing the value of the content header. So I'm grabbing its text and I'm storing it into the data cache. This becomes the model I'm using for my data cache, and this becomes the value I am setting. So I'm setting the value of this model in my global data cache. And then in my verification step, I again refer to the model, the element, the field, and my verification. Okay, I can do something with that. I can say, okay, this content header text, so it's going to pull it out of the data cache, and it's going to verify that that text, that value, matches what I am expecting. So that's how you can get around, you know, how do I capture a value in page number 1, navigate through page 2, page 3, page 4, and then finally reference that value, so, and do something with it. You know, either maybe you need to manipulate it. Mostly it's for verification. It's what I primarily use it for. Some recommendations. Kind of touched this from the beginning. Focus on your business action being exercised. If you are naming methods, click on element A. You know, type text into B. You know, select value from dropdown. Now you are focused in the weeds. You're focused too much on the details. Try to not focus on what are the elements of the page that you're using, because that's more of the how. How are you testing the application? You need to focus on what you're testing. What is the logic? Why are you clicking on this element? Why are you entering this text? Why are you entering, you know, selecting this value from the dropdown? I would even go so far as to say, okay, if you're filling out a shipping form, you can have one method that says, fill in all of these details for an address. You don't need to have one method, put in the address line 1, put in the first name, put in the last name. That's too much detail. Think of the major steps, just like navigating through a street. You're going to go to the end of the block, turn left. You're not worried about, oh, I'm going to the end of the block. I need to turn on my turn signal. I need to turn my steering wheel to the left, and I need to hit the accelerator. That's too much detail. Find that right balance between what you're navigating, what you're testing, and how you're going from point A to point B. And that's more about here. And test automation, like I said, it is hard. The test steps themselves, I talked about, okay, in those page methods, that's the hardest part of test automation. So yes, have your senior programmers manage making those test steps, putting those together, and making them so that they are modular, reusable, and can be easily used then by your junior programmers. Now your junior programmers can come in, all they got to do is string things together, and they have a complete working test. They can, once those test steps are created, it's a matter of minutes in having a fully functional test working. And like I said, junior programmers can easily put those together. And as your junior programmers get better and better, you can have them starting writing the test steps themselves. The more reusable test steps you have, the better it is for a team. So, one person creates a test step. Now, other testers can start taking advantage of that. So it's kind of like building a library. You make a library of reusable test steps, and now you can create a large variety of tests out of those test steps. And that's it. So let's look at Q&A. Do we have questions in the chat that I can answer? Let's see, where is
So I actually have a question for you, Cody. It looks like well, number one, there's a fantastic compliment for you in the chat that you absolutely should read. And
Great.
Totally agree with it. I think you did a great job. Actually, I have two questions for you. One is kind of getting back to the points you were just talking about with junior developers, with more senior developers, kind of working with the team from that point of view. I think it's a great way to be thoughtful of how you can not only make use of the resources that you have, but also just groom them and help them advance in their careers as well. And so I'm curious, have you gone through that with seeing a more junior tester or programmer kind of use this methodology and see them advance over time? And how has that, if you have seen that, how has that improved their overall skills compared to somebody who may be just thrown into the whirlpool, so to speak?
Yep, that's good. Yes, we have seen. It's common for companies such as Dell. We'll actually bring in like an intern maybe fresh out of college or maybe still in college, and we can put them at creating these test cases, and as they learn the code, learn the application, they can become better and better, and we can hand them more and more test steps to start coding. So it becomes an excellent stepping stone for junior developers to learn more and more on honing their skills and becoming better and better equipped at handling problems and challenging challenging them to learn how to handle, especially UI automation. Like I said in the beginning, UI automation is hard. It takes time to be good at it. That's something I've learned over time.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's just, I can just envision, an entire program being built around this to help your teams grow their skills and get better at it, and then obviously, just carrying that forward into other departments as well as they advance in their career. So it's just a fantastic way of looking at that. Mm-hmm. My other question is, as you were explaining it's kind of going back a lot more to as I had mentioned in my opening, more on the production side of things, working with developers and architects and thinking about how code is originated before it gets to testing. A lot of the times people talk about the concept of MVC or model view control methodology, and it feels a lot like that's what you're talking about as well from a testing perspective. is that you have your model, you have your pages, and of course your control mechanisms with that. So my question on that is, one, am I even remotely in the ballpark, or am I way off? And then hopefully if I am in the ballpark, which is good, then my question is, how often do you involve development, the people that are actually creating the code itself, into this process to help validate the cases that you're making, and even taking part in that overall program we just talked about?
Mm-hmm. So you're right. I've deliberately put things very modular, similar to the MVC methodology. In this case, it's, I'm not sure a good acronym for it. I've never thought about it before. But you're right. I'm deliberately dividing things up so that they are modular, which makes things easier to manage, easier to control, easier to, even easier to refactor when I need to change something. You know, because of the different layers, there's a fairly well-defined interface. In fact, that even reminds me something I should have brought up before, and that is elements. So one of the rules I have is that I like to follow is elements. You know, the elements that you're interacting in, they're only visible on the page. The test step, at the test level, it should have no access to elements. I absolutely hate if I'm going to a test and I see click on element, whatever it is, click on the Vostro element. Yes, I have a method named, but it's not interacting directly with that element. So, you know, directly interacting with the elements must be isolated to within that page. And I can even make these private elements. I probably should even make these private so that one page cannot get to the elements of another page. It doesn't make sense to let one page, you know, get the elements of another page. So, and the other part of your question was, okay, how often do we get development involved with this? Not, to be honest, not as often as I would like to. I would love to see development and testing play a much more interactive role and a lot more handshaking. So I would, using this approach, I think it would be very good to have development and testing work together kind of side by side. And it probably makes sense to say, okay, developers, why don't we have the developers creating those test steps, and testers, even junior testers, can then are just writing the tests. And it becomes a very good handshaking that way.
Yeah, I just see a natural synergy there, especially if they're already doing that MVC type of approach. Then you can just piggyback right on top of that and gain some efficiencies there. I'm curious if there are any other questions out there in the audience.
Okay.
A couple of comments again, more compliments for you, which is always good to see.
Thanks much.